Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda. I am here with my January book haul revisit. I'm doing this again because I just filmed it and I was like blah, 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 talking too fast. So I'm going to try and calm down. You'd think I'd had like 5 cups of coffee this morning, but I didn't. And we're going to go through this. So if you don't know what a book haul revisit is, I believe this was started by Doris at Aldi Books. I always watch Greg at Supposedly Fun do it. And what it is you just go back to, so it's January. So I'm going to go back to past Januaries and see if I've read the books that I hauled in those months. Now, this is not going to be a super long video because I only started really keeping track of my hauls last March of 2023. So I'm only going back to January of 2024. Starting in March, videos will get longer because they'll be more than 1 month. But anyhow, I did bring home 13 books in January of 2024. Now, if you watch my video, you know the saga of my lack of bookshelves, which means that I have lots of stacks. And I don't want to upset those stacks, so I'm just going to put the pictures up here of the books that I have. So there you go. It's just going to be easier. I don't want to knock my stacks over because they're getting really tall. I need a bookshelf. But let's get started. So the first book I brought in January was my book of the month book. And this was Mercury by Amy Jo Burns. The really interesting thing about this book is I actually read it the month that I brought it in, and that almost never happens. So yay me, I did that. So this is a historical-ish fiction. I mean, I think it's set in the 80s. It's set when the characters are about my age, so it's about the age I was then. So that was a really fun thing about this book. I thought it was really well written, but I don't remember that much about it, to tell you the truth. I read this back in January. Actually, I can give you the date that I finished it. Hold on one second here. Yeah, I finished it on January 16th, and I don't remember much about it. So, you know, it was one of those books where the reading experience was good, but not memorable. So there you go. That was Mercury by Amy Jo Burns. Now, the next 2 books are both audiobooks that I got from Audible because I can only get them from Audible, and things like that make me mad. And it's why I can't get rid of my Audible subscription, is because they have these books that only they have that I really want. But this is a pair. It's going to make sense. And I've not listened to either of these yet, but I'll get to that. The first one is the Iliad. And this one is both of them, it's the Iliad and the Odyssey. So I have the Iliad translated by Emily Wilson, or is it Wilson? I can't remember who the narrator of this is. I think one of them is narrated by Audra McDonald. I have never read the Iliad. So I know kind of the story because from reading Natalie Haynes and listening to Natalie Haynes, I kind of know the story, but I've never actually read it. And then I also got the Odyssey by Homer, translated by Emily Wilson. Now I have read the Odyssey. I haven't read this translation of it, but I have read the Odyssey a couple of times in high school. So I do know the Odyssey, but it's been a long time. And I kind of remember more, you know, the bigger concepts of it than the finer details. So I got both of these thinking, oh, these would be great to listen to as a family in the car when we're on road trips. Well, we haven't gone on any big road trips other than that one we didn't plan on going on last April, when we got COVID and couldn't fly back home from Arizona. But I realized that's just not going to happen because my husband will just start talking through it, and that's just going to drive me crazy. So this is not going to happen. I'm just going to listen to them on my own. So there you go. Okay. Now I have 3 books that I have already read. So the next 3 I have read these. And the first one is Night Side of the River by Jeanette Winterson. This is a short story collection, and the short stories are ghost stories. I really loved this book, and I have recommended it quite a bit. But I did not think it was a super scary, these are not super scary ghost stories, but I did find the first section, which is like ghost stories in sort of a technological, like there's a technological element to it. That I found very unsettling. So not frightening, but unsettling. Very effectively so. I think that's what she was trying to do. But there are funny stories, there are sad stories, there are sweet stories. You kind of have them all in here. And then you also have these sort of, I'm assuming true little essays from her life about meeting ghosts. We're gonna put that out there. I don't know, but I really enjoyed this book and I would recommend it. As I said, not super scary, and it didn't have it didn't feel like a Halloween book. So I wouldn't wait till spooky season. If you're interested in this, you can read it anytime. It doesn't feel especially spooky. So it can be, don't wait till October if you want to read it. It's a good book. And then I have 2 Shakespeare plays. So the first one is the one that we read in February of last year, I think. And that is The Merry Wives of Windsor. So this was the second play that we did in the Bard Room, if my memory is correct. And this is a comedy. And it features Falstaff. So Falstaff is a character that shows up in the Henry the Fourth Part 1, Part 2. He might show up in Henry V. Like, I remember Falstaff in the Kenneth Branagh movie, but I don't remember if that's actually from the play, and we haven't read the play, so I don't know. Was Falstaff in Henry V? I don't know. Anyway, it's a character that Elizabeth I really liked, so Shakespeare wrote a play about him for her. And this is almost slapstick comedy. It's not super deep. It's just kind of a funny, rompy play, lots of sex jokes, lots of jokes at Falstaff's expense. I enjoyed it. I will say the Falstaff in this play didn't feel like the Falstaff in Henry IV Part 1, which is the other play we've read that he's in. So that's just my sort of observation on that. But I did enjoy it. And the second one was the play I think we did it in March or April. I can't remember, but I knew we were going to do it because I reserve the right in the Bard Room to basically decide on a play if it's something I'm going to be seeing. And I went to see this play, Coriolanus. It was put on by Portland Center Stage last year. And this is a really interesting one. It's a political tragedy set in ancient Rome. And it's an interesting play to watch now. Not that there's a direct correlation between what we're going through now and what's going on in the play, but there's very similar vibes, if that makes any sense. Like, there's sort of similar feelings about it a little bit. So it's interesting. This is an interesting play to see through modern eyes. Speaking of modern eyes, I also, in addition to seeing the Portland Center Stage version, I saw a production from the Stratford Festival in Canada on Broadway HD, and that production is actually set in present day, and they do a really good job with that. It's an interesting play. Now, I went to see it with Bookish Best Friend, and she'd never read Coriolanus, and she said it was hard. I mean, and I get that. Like, I think it is hard to see this play if you don't know what it is, and you should know the story going in, because I do think it is one of the harder plays. But I enjoyed the play, reading it. I thought it was a really interesting play through modern eyes. Now I have the next 3 books I have not read yet. So the first one is A Day of Fire. And for author, in my spreadsheet, I have various, because there's about 7 different authors. Now, the marquee author on this one is Kate Quinn, who, if you read historical fiction, you know who Kate Quinn is. She wrote, I think The Alice Network is probably her best known book, although I haven't read that one. I have it, but I haven't read it. The Huntress is another one. The Rose Code is the one that I read. The Huntress, and I read The Rose Code. But there's like 7 authors, and they've done a couple of these where they look at a historical event, and then they each tell a story about someone who is somehow involved in that historical event. And I have read one before, and that one was set during the Reign of Terror and the French Revolution. So, most of the characters. Spoiler. But it was really good. This one is Pompeii and the eruption of Vesuvius. So I'm assuming that most of the characters are going to end the same way, because I don't think that's a spoiler. It can't be a spoiler because I haven't read the book yet, so I can't spoil it, but I'm just going to make that assumption for what it is. But I will put all the authors down below so you can see who they are. I've been meaning to read this one for a long time. I've had it on my immediate TBR bookshelf, and I just didn't get to it. But I am looking forward to it. So hopefully I'll get to that one soon. And the next one, I'm not actually going to finish for 2 years. So this one is Shakespeare's Sonnets and Poems, which I apparently ordered at the same time as The Merry Wives of Windsor and Coriolanus. And I have read the sonnets out of this, most of the sonnets. But in the Bard Room, my Shakespeare project, we've decided that for this April and next April, we're going to read, instead of a play, we're going to read a longer poetic work by Shakespeare. And there's 2 of those in this. I can't remember which ones they are, but they're in that. So I'm not going to be finished with this book until we read the second one in April of 2026. So there you go. I had it for a while as my currently reading list, and I finally just took it off because it's pointless to keep a book on there for 2 years. When I finish it, I finish it. There you go. And then I do have a short story collection. It's called The Islands by Dionne Irving. So I should have looked this up, but Dionne Irving is, I believe, a Canadian author of Jamaican descent. So these are stories from the Caribbean islands. I don't know if they're all from Jamaica or the Bahamas or whatever, but they're from that area. And I'm really looking forward to reading it. It's just that I have a lot of short story collections and they're kind of stacked up there. And when I get to this one, I get to it. So I don't know when I'll read it, but I will read it. And then we're going to finish off with 3 mysteries, 2 of which I've actually read. So last year, 2024, is the year that I really kind of formalized my Agatha Christie reading. I had been reading Agatha Christie for a while, but in 2024 and continuing into this year, 2025, I read an Agatha Christie book a month in roughly publication order. So I have 2 Agatha Christie books that I think what happened is they're the only 2 books that when I started this, I didn't already own. The first one is Towards Zero, which I was supposed to read in December, but read in November because I got confused. But it is a superintendent battle book. So I was a little apprehensive because I have not really liked the other superintendent battle books. There's the 7 Dials Mystery and One About Clocks, something like that. I didn't really like either of those. This one I did like. Now, to be fair, might be because I read it right after the election and it was the sort of brainlessness that I needed. That could be it. So I probably am willing to look over some things because of that I might have been more critical of at a different time. And yes, it is a superintendent battle book, but it feels like a Perot book because he spends a lot of time talking about what Perot would do. So I think you could easily, I wonder if the Perot show actually did that. I'll have to check if they actually just retold this with Perot, because you could do that really easily. That's probably why I liked this one, is because it was Perot-y and not so battle-y, but there you go. But I enjoyed it. It does have tennis on the cover, and there's very little tennis in this book. And that's not a big deal to me because I don't really care. That's not why I read this book. But if you're looking for a tennis mystery, there's not really that much tennis in this book. And the second one is another one I was a little apprehensive about, and that is N or M. So this is the 3rd Tommy and Tuppence book, but it's actually the 2nd novel. So their first novel was The Secret Adversary, which was the 2nd novel that Agatha Christie ever wrote. So this one is set, The Secret Adversary was set in the 20s. They're like 20-year-olds, and they're just starting out, and it's very madcappy, and it's entertaining. It is. It's sort of a light and entertaining book. I went into it knowing it was her 2nd book, and she is an author who kind of and so it was good for what it was. And then they have a short story collection, so that's why I said it's the 3rd book, but it's the 2nd novel. And the short story collection is Partners in Crime. And I'll be honest, I got really tired of Tommy and Tuppence in Partners in Crime. Like, their shit got old really quick for me. So I was apprehensive about this one. The interesting thing about Tommy and Tuppence is they're the only ones of Agatha Christie's detectives who actually age. So Perot is like an old guy when you meet him, and he's an old guy all the way through. Like Miss Marple too. Like, they don't age at all, which is really kind of hard with Perot because, and I haven't read enough Marple to know if this is the case, but with Perot, there are like some actual like historical events, but he's still not aging, which is weird. But Tommy and Tuppence do age. So as I said, The Secret Adversary, they're kind of in their 20s. So this one's in the 40s. This book was written in, I want to say like 1940. So it's this one I actually labeled in my spreadsheet as a time capsule book, because Agatha Christie she wrote a lot during World War II, but she didn't talk a lot about World War II in her books, except in this one. But it was early enough in World War II that some big events that we know happened in World War II hadn't happened yet, and they were still thinking it might happen, such as France falling to the Nazis. So it was really interesting to read in that sense. Tommy and Tuppence are middle-aged in this book. Their children are young adults. And they were easier to take. I'm going to be honest. They were just easier to take on this one. It was pretty good. Yeah, it was definitely, I was pleasantly surprised by this book. Doesn't especially make me excited to read. I think there's 2 more Tommy and Tuppences, only because I've heard they're not good. But I am happy that this one didn't irritate me like Partners in Crime did. So, and then the last book is another mystery, and it's actually heavily influenced by Agatha Christie, but I have not read it. However, it is on my TBR for this month, and that is The Busybody by Kemper Donovan. And Kemper Donovan is the host of the All About Agatha podcast, where he and his late co-host, they had read all of Agatha Christie's books and ranked them. And I use their sort of like, my inspiration for ranking my Shakespeare plays comes from that podcast. And now he just kind of does interviews and talks about Agatha Christie things. It's very interesting, but my God, that guy needs an editor. You do not need to have 2.5-hour podcast episodes. Just there, the guy needs an editor. I think that his partner had been more of the editor, and then she passed away, and yeah, anyway. This is his book. It's actually the second book he's written. I'm a little apprehensive about this for 2 reasons. One, I have heard very mixed things about it. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Leandra, but I believe you read it and it wasn't successful for you, if I remember correctly. And Leandra is someone I would really trust for a book like this. So there's that. I have heard some not great things about it. But also, basically, it involves like a woman who ran for president and didn't win. And do I want to read that? I don't know. So it is on my TBR for January. It's my pile of possibilities, I should say. It's on my pile of possibilities for January. But I'm also giving myself the freedom to DNF it if it really isn't a book that's going to work for me. Sometimes I will put more effort into continuing a book, and this is one where I will probably put less effort into continuing it if it's not working for me. So there you go. Of those 13 books, 6 are unread. And so next January, when you see the January revisit, I'll have 2 years. So I'll have 2024 and 2025. And hopefully 2025 is not going to be that many because I went a little overboard. Yeah, in December. I went overboard in December, so I need to not buy much in January, but I also have books that were back ordered or haven't arrived yet. And so they might still, it's a thing. But I'm not going to, when I do the revisit of this particular year of 2024, I'm not going to revisit the books that I have read as of this filming. That just doesn't make sense to just keep saying I've already read this every year. So I'm only going to be revisiting the 6 books on this list that I did not read yet. So there you go. That was my January book haul revisit. Wasn't too bad, but there's going to be some long ones coming up this year. Just warning you, especially once we get to March and I start doing 2 years worth, but oh well. Anyway, that's my book haul revisit. Any thoughts on any of these books? Let me know. Do you have a husband who talks through podcasts when you try to listen, or audiobooks when you try to listen to them together? Podcasts too? Or am I all by myself? Let me know. Anyway, like, subscribe, join my Discord, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.